It was the glasses that gave him away. Avery noticed them the moment she stepped out of the car in front of the Mercer estate. Tinted lenses, indoors at 7 in the evening, in a house where every light had been dialed down low. The kind of detail most people would miss. Avery wasn't most people. She had spent years in professional kitchens where noticing things, a sauce beginning to break, a pastry just past its peak, meant the difference between a perfect plate and a ruined one. She stood in the driveway and looked at the stone facade, the manicured evergreens flanking the entrance, the amber light spilling from tall windows. Even in November, the place looked like something off the cover of a lifestyle magazine. Beside her, a driver set her single suitcase on the ground and retreated without a word. Avery picked it up herself. 3 days earlier, she had been in Vancouver, standing in the walk-in cooler at Harlow's, checking that the millfill for tomorrow's private dinner was coming together the way she'd planned. 3 days earlier, her biggest problem had been whether the pastry cream had set long enough or whether the new prep cook had used salted butter again by mistake. 3 days earlier, she had not yet answered her dad's call. She had almost let it go to voicemail. That would have been the smarter choice. Richard Caldwell was not a man who called his daughter with good news. He called when he wanted something, and in the last 28 years, what he wanted and what was good for Avery had rarely been the same thing. But something had made her pick up. Maybe the late hour, maybe a formless worry she couldn't name. And in the space of 11 minutes, her father had dismantled her entire life in Vancouver, with the kind of efficient calm he usually reserved for business meetings. Her mother's bakery chain, the one her mum had built over 20 years and left behind when she died, was gone, not struggling, not in difficulty, gone. The debt had been accumulating quietly for 4 years, while Richard assured anyone who asked that everything was fine, and when the last creditor ran out of patience, he had found a solution. He had arranged a partnership with Mercer Group, one of the largest private real estate and hospitality conglomerates in the country, a lifeline for the business, an injection of capital to save what remained of her mum's name. In exchange, his daughter would marry Luca Mercer. Avery had sat down on the floor of the walk-in cooler because the cold felt useful just then. She had sat there for a while, phone still in her hand, listening to her own breathing. Then she had booked a flight to Toronto for the following morning. Eleanor Mercer was exactly the kind of woman who made you straighten your posture without meaning to. She had met Avery for coffee 3 days before the wedding at a quiet hotel in Midtown, and the whole conversation had lasted 45 minutes. Eleanor did not waste time. She had warm eyes and a handshake that meant something, and she had laid everything on the table with the directness Avery would come to appreciate. "I know this wasn't your idea," Eleanor had said. "It wasn't mine either, if I'm honest. But the arrangement benefits both families, and I won't pretend otherwise. What I can tell you is that my son is not a cruel person. Difficult, yes. Occasionally impossible, but not cruel." Avery had appreciated that she hadn't tried to sell it. "What I'd ask," Eleanor had continued, setting down her tea, "is that you give it a fair try, not forever. Just honestly." Avery had said she would. She had meant it at the time. The private ceremony was brief and witnessed only by Eleanor, Richard, and a notary. Luca Mercer had worn a charcoal suit and expressed approximately 2 sentences of pleasantry before the paperwork was signed. He was, Avery had to admit, unreasonably handsome for someone so clearly determined not to use it for anything pleasant. Sharp jaw, dark hair, broad shoulders, and behind those tinted glasses, nothing she could read at all. He had not shaken her hand afterward. He had simply turned and walked toward the car, and Eleanor had given Avery a look that seemed to say, "See what I meant." The estate was Luca's primary residence, a 30-minute drive from the city. Eleanor had her own home nearby and came for Sunday dinners. Between visits, it was Avery, Luca, and a small, quietly competent household staff led by a woman named Agnes, who had worked for the Mercer family for 18 years and had the kind of efficient grace that made large houses feel manageable. Agnes showed Avery to the East Wing on her first evening. The suite was large and tastefully furnished in deep greens and warm wood tones, felt like the interior of a very expensive Canadian hunting lodge. Avery liked it despite herself. What she did not like was discovering the following morning that sharing a kitchen was apparently going to require negotiation. Not officially. No one had said anything about kitchen access, but when Avery came downstairs at 7, looking to make herself a proper breakfast, eggs, toast, something with the dried herbs she'd spotted hanging in the pantry, she found Luca already at the island, reading something on a tablet propped carefully in front of him. He looked up with the expression of a man who had not anticipated sharing a kitchen and found the prospect deeply inconvenient. "I usually eat before 8, he said. Avery opened the refrigerator. "So do I." A silence stretched between them, pointed and unhelpful. "The staff can prepare whatever you need." "I'm a chef," Avery said, pulling out eggs and a block of aged cheddar. "I don't have staff make me breakfast." Luca looked at her for a moment, then looked back at his tablet. Avery made her omelet. She made enough for two and set a plate on the counter near him without comment. He ate it without thanking her, but he ate all of it. The first 2 weeks were mostly that. Careful orbiting, brief collisions, long silences in large rooms. Luca worked from home the majority of the time. His office on the second floor, door usually closed, calls that ran until late evening. When Avery asked Agnes about it, Agnes smiled the smile of someone who chose their words carefully. "Mr. Mercer has always been private," Agnes said, "even before." Before what, Avery didn't ask, not yet. What she did notice, in small accumulating pieces, the way Luca always sat at the same corner of the dining table. The way he tilted documents slightly to his left when reading them. The way he had once reached for his water glass and missed it by 3 inches, then corrected without expression, as though the correction itself was the practiced part. The way he had come down the stairs one evening, when the foyer light was out for a replacement bulb, and stopped at the second-to-last step, until Agnes arrived with a lamp. A pause so brief Avery might have imagined it. She hadn't imagined it. She began, quietly and without announcement, to pay attention. Luca was not kind in those early weeks, but he was not exactly unkind either. He had pointed out, on her third day, that she'd left a baking tray on the stovetop, and the residual heat had warped the element cover, delivered with the tone of a man issuing a press release. Avery had said, with equal pleasantry, that she would replace it, and that he was welcome to thank her for the banana bread she'd left on the counter that morning. He had not responded to that. But the banana bread was gone by noon. He complained about the music she played while she cooked. She liked old Joni Mitchell records, and a particular Quebec singer-songwriter she'd discovered in her early 20s. He said it was distracting. She turned it down by exactly 3 decibels and called that a compromise. He complained that she kept the kitchen lights too bright. She had looked at him when he said it, standing in the doorway with his arms folded, and she had not responded immediately. She had simply filed it alongside everything else. That night, she adjusted the dimmer switches throughout the main floor to a softer setting, not because he had asked, because she had begun to understand why. A month in, a package arrived from Vancouver. It was from Gwen, her closest friend and the woman who had talked her out of quitting the culinary industry twice in 10 years. Inside the box were a jar of Gwen's homemade jam, a dog-eared food memoir Avery had mentioned wanting to read, and a handwritten card with a drawing of a tiny spatula. "You're doing something brave. Don't forget that." Underneath, in smaller letters, "Also call me. I'm dying here." Avery had laughed until her eyes watered. She called Gwen immediately and talked for an hour, walking laps around the estate grounds in her coat, while the first real cold of December settled over the property. She didn't notice Luca watching from the window until she came back inside. He was in the hallway when she pushed through the side door, stamping warmth back into her boots. "You were out there for an hour," he said. I was on the phone." In -12. "Gwen is worth -12. Avery pulled off her coat. "She's my best friend. We haven't seen each other since I moved here." Something passed across Luca's face, too brief to name. Then he said, "Agnes left dinner in the oven," and walked away. Avery stood in the hallway for a moment, thinking about the way he'd said it. Not "go eat," not "dinner's ready." Something closer to, "I noticed you hadn't eaten." Dressed up in logistics, but there underneath. She went and ate dinner. The anniversary of her mum's death fell on a Thursday in mid-December. Avery had planned to spend it quietly, taken out the old photo she kept in her wallet, her mum in the first bakery with flour on her apron and laughing at something off camera, and made her mum's shortbread recipe from memory. The one she'd learned at 9 years old on a Saturday morning in their kitchen in Oakville. She had planned to light a candle and eat shortbread and let herself miss her. What she hadn't planned was calling her dad. She didn't know why she did it, some remnant of wanting him to be different than he was. She had called, and Richard had answered, and in the background she could hear a television and a second voice, a woman's voice, and when she mentioned that it was Mum's anniversary, there was a pause, and then he said, "I know, Avery. Look, I've got company right now. I'll call you later." He hadn't called. Avery sat at the kitchen island for a long time after that. The shortbread had cooled. The candle had burned down by half. She didn't hear Luca come in. He had a habit of moving quietly, which she understood better now than she had 3 weeks ago. "You've been in here for 2 hours," he said. "It's my mom's anniversary today." Silence. Then Luca pulled out the stool across from her and sat down. Not close enough to be intrusive. Close enough to be present. "My father died 6 years ago," he said eventually. "January 14th. I still count down to it without meaning to. Starting on the 10th every year." Avery looked at him. "There's no right way to spend that day," he said. "Anyone who tells you otherwise hasn't lost someone they actually needed." She didn't trust her voice enough to respond. So she pushed the plate of shortbread toward him. He took one. They sat like that for a while, the candle between them, not talking. It was the quietest and most human Luca had been since the day she arrived, and it was the first time Avery felt something in her chest shift. Not dramatically, not like a revelation, but like a small door that had been stuck and had finally worked itself loose. 2 weeks before Christmas, Avery went downtown to drop off family trust documents. Eleanor had forgotten at the estate. Luca's building was gleaming and cold in the December light, 40-some floors of glass and steel in the financial district. The receptionist recognized her on sight, which still caught her off guard. She took the elevator to the executive floor. The assistant outside Luca's office looked up when she arrived and, with a slightly uncertain expression, told her she could go through. The door was slightly ajar. Avery pushed it open and stopped. Standing in front of Luca's desk was a woman in an expensive winter coat, her back to the door, her voice raised just enough to carry. She was saying something about being tired of being treated like she didn't matter, about being patient long enough. Luca was seated behind the desk, his posture controlled, his face composed in the way it got when he was actually feeling something he didn't intend to show. "Isabel," he said, with a flatness that meant, "Stop." The woman spun around at the sound of the door. She was beautiful, and she was furious, and she looked at Avery with the particular calculation of someone who has just been handed unexpected leverage. "This is her," Isabel said. It wasn't a question, the one his mother arranged. "Avery," Luca said with unusual steadiness, "can you wait outside?" But Isabel had already moved, placing herself closer to the desk, closer to Luca, in a way clearly designed to provoke. "She doesn't know, does she?" She smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. "She doesn't know about your eye." The word landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Luca's expression didn't change. But the stillness that came over him was different from his usual composure. It was the stillness of a person bracing. "Isabel," his voice had gone very quiet. "You've said enough. You can barely see out of your right eye. You've been losing peripheral vision for 2 years. You had me keep it secret. I kept it. And then you ended things and replaced me with—" She gestured at Avery. "This arrangement. So I think I've more than earned the right to say enough." She walked out. The office was very quiet. Avery stood in the doorway. Luca had taken off his glasses, finally, and he was looking at the desk. Or maybe slightly to the left of her, because that was the eye that still worked the way it was supposed to. After a long moment, he said, "I was going to tell you." "When?" She wasn't angry. She was something more complicated than angry. He didn't answer right away. "When I knew what it was going to be permanently." "Is it permanent?" A pause. "The right eye has about 30% of its original function. It's not worsening, but it's not recovering either. The left is fine." He set the glasses down on the desk. "I had it arranged so it wasn't obvious. The lighting in the house, the office layout, how I sit." He stopped. "It wasn't something I wanted people adjusting around." "I already was," Avery said. He looked at her then, properly, his left eye finding her. "I know," he said quietly. "I noticed." The drive home was the longest 30 minutes she could remember. She went straight up to the suite, sat on the edge of the bed, and worked through the mathematics of it. What she had been asked to be here, what she actually was, what the past weeks had added up to. Eleanor had known. Of course Eleanor had known. The practical logic had been a convenient framing, but the real reason was simpler and harder to say. Eleanor had wanted someone who wouldn't leave when she found out. She had chosen Avery because she'd believed Avery was steady enough to stay. Avery wasn't sure if she was more hurt by the calculation, or by the fact that some part of her still wanted to prove it right. She called Gwen and laid it out, all of it. Gwen listened without interrupting, which was how Avery knew she was taking it seriously. "What do you want to do?" Gwen asked. "I don't know." "Yes, you do," Gwen said. "You've known for a while. You're just annoyed at yourself for knowing." Avery didn't respond to that, because Gwen was accurate and it was irritating. "He's been managing it alone," Avery said after a moment. "For 2 years." "I know." That's. She couldn't finish the sentence. "I know," Gwen said again. She decided to leave on a Thursday. Bag half packed, not dramatically, just practically the things she'd need for the first week back in Vancouver. She had texted Gwen an arrival time. She had not yet told Luca. She was pulling her coat from the wardrobe when she heard the knock. It was the first time in 6 weeks Luca had knocked on her door. She stared at it for a moment. "Come in." He stood in the doorway. He was not wearing the glasses. His right eye looked identical to his left from a distance. The damage wasn't visible in any obvious way. He looked like a man who had made a decision about something and was not certain it had been a good one. He looked at the half-packed bag on the bed. "Agnes mentioned you ordered a car for tomorrow morning." "Agnes is observant," Avery said. "She is." He stayed in the doorway. "I'm not going to ask you not to go. You came here under circumstances that weren't fair to you. You've been more than—" He paused. "You've been more than what was asked of you." Avery folded a sweater and set it in the bag. "Is that all?" "No." He came further into the room, which he had never done before, and stopped near the window. The estate grounds were dark outside, garden lights throwing long shadows across the snow. "The night you adjusted the dimmer switches," he said. "I didn't say anything. I should have." "You didn't have to say anything. You knew for weeks, didn't you?" "I suspected," Avery said. "I know how kitchens work. You learn to read the way people move through space." He was quiet for a long time. Outside, snow had started again, coming down in the particular unhurried way it did in December in Ontario, as if it had nowhere else to be. "I had a driver for 2 years before you came," Luca said. "I hadn't cooked anything since the accident. I hadn't walked the garden in winter because the depth perception makes the dark difficult." He glanced toward the window. "You put extra lighting along the back path 2 weeks ago. Agnes helped me figure out the circuit." "I know. A beat. I went out there last Saturday morning, early before you were up." He paused for a long moment. "It was the first time in 2 years I walked those grounds alone." Avery stopped folding. "I don't know how to do this the right way," Luca said, still looking at the window. "I don't know how to be married in a way that's actually fair or honest or whatever it's supposed to be. But I know that since you came here, I've eaten real meals at a real table, and that this house doesn't feel like somewhere I'm just waiting things out in anymore. And I know that last Thursday, when you sat in the kitchen with that candle, I did not want you to be sitting there alone." Avery looked at him. "And I know," he said, finally turning to face her, "that I don't want you to leave tomorrow." The snow came down outside, slow and steady. "You should have told me," Avery said. "Yes. From the beginning." "Yes." He didn't flinch from it. "I know." She looked at the bag on the bed. Then she looked at Luca. At the man who had eaten her omelet without saying thank you, who had noticed she hadn't eaten, who had sat with her on the worst anniversary of the year and not made it strange. The man who had walked his garden alone at dawn for the first time in 2 years because she had put lights along the path. She didn't unpack the bag that night, but she canceled the car. In the spring, Mercer Group signed an agreement with her father's remaining creditors, and the last 2 bakeries that had belonged to her mum were brought under a new trust. One that bore her mother's name. It had been Eleanor's idea. She had come to Avery with the proposal one Sunday in March, sitting in the kitchen over tea, and Avery had had to look at the ceiling for a long moment before she could answer. In the spring, Luca's vision stabilized in a way his specialist described as better than projected. The right eye would not improve significantly, but it would not decline further. He had started attending external meetings again, navigating the world with the same composure he brought to everything. The same composure Avery now understood was partly genuine, and partly the long habit of a man who had decided that needing help was something you did quietly, if at all. She was teaching him that it was also something you could do out loud. It was a project that was going to take time. On the first Saturday of April, Avery opened a small catering operation out of the estate kitchen. Weekend bookings only, private events, the kind of food she had always wanted to cook, without a restaurant's timeline pressing in around her. Gwen flew in for the first booking ostensibly as a guest, actually as moral support and emergency sous chef. She stood in the kitchen doorway, watching Luca carry a bread basket out to the garden table where clients were waiting. He finds his way around this kitchen better than most people with perfect vision, Gwen observed. He's been paying attention, Avery said. Gwen gave her a look that said several things at once. Avery handed her a spoon to taste the sauce with and chose not to respond to any of them. Later that evening, after Gwen had retired to the guest suite and the kitchen was clean and the house had gone quiet, Avery stood at the window with a cup of tea and looked out at the garden path, lit the way she'd lit it in December. Luca came to sit beside her. He didn't say anything at first and she didn't either. After a while, he reached over and took the tea out of her hand, took a sip and handed it back. "That's mine," Avery said. "I know." She looked at him. He was looking out at the garden, the left side of his mouth, doing the thing it did when he was trying not to smile. She took her tea back. Outside, the April dark settled gently over the property, and at the far end of the path, a light she had put there in December was still burning.